We're here for Arron Sturgis, a preservation timber frame, to present to us and to Mark, who's representing the select board, their review of the town hall building, the structure, their assessment of the structure, the needs of the structure, and then their assessment of what they feel is prudent in regards to costs. And Arron is also going to give us some guidance in regards to how he feels would be appropriate for us to approach the work. So at this point, Arron, I'm turning the floor over to you.
All right.
And, thank you so much for coming, and please express our regret that Jess couldn't make it.
Yeah. Jessica MilNeil, my partner in this report, who does a lot of the investigation with me, has very small children, so she's at home. I try not to ask them to come out at night if I don't have to. So this is a very difficult building to look at as one person. You really need two sets of eyes to go through it and go through it again. In fact, she's been up a couple of times since we did our initial assessment to double check things. Typically, I'll talk a little bit about how we work and how we came to this and a little bit of my background, because there are a lot of folks out there that can do assessments of buildings, and architects and engineers do them on a regular basis. We are not architects, we are not engineers, we are preservation timber framers, thus the name, preservation timber framing. Our approach is a preservation approach, and I'll talk a little bit more about that with regards to how I made some decisions about how to move forward. But we focus primarily on the structural components of the building and work outward, okay? Because this is where we find all over New England areas that have been either neglected or misunderstood and changed dramatically, not always to the best effect. Your town hall has seen a lot of evolution over time. It's had a lot of repair. It's in disrepair at this point. We all know that. I'm not saying anything new to you about that. But it's also just a tremendous building. The model that we have to our left is a really good illustration of some of the best knowledge of timber framing and execution of timber framing, anywhere in the state of Maine. So you should be really proud of this building. I always have a little reservation when I talk so much about the issues that we find, and not spending as much time on how great the building. I could do a whole nother assessment on just how great this building is. And I want you to understand how excited we are to be a part of a project like this, because this is as good as it gets. This is repeated over and over in Maine to some degree, variations on a theme, but this is a very well thought out, very well executed building, and it really deserves your attention. And I'm really glad that you have formed this committee to go after it. My background is in historic preservation, specifically in the field. I have a degree in psychology from UNH. I was not trained formally. I went through apprenticeship and mentorship. And so I've learned this trade just over time. And most of my crew members come from different backgrounds. I have 2 master's levels in historic preservation on the crew. Jessica has a degree in marketing or something like that from Wesleyan College, and she went to Bennett Street. So the people that come to our company, and the reason I can produce this kind of document is because they come from diverse backgrounds and we train. And I'm going to talk more about training and how we get this job done. So that I'll circle back to that thought with you in a few minutes. I'm here to answer your questions. I know it's a lot to digest. We find that when we combine the written report in combination and collaboration with the drawings, and we also reference the photo report, that gives the best understanding of the building in general. Because if you're just reading about truss layout, man, it's tough to visualize for a lot of people. And so we've found over the years, and this product has developed over the years, that when we combine these things, people understand it better. They have more informed questions about how to move forward. And I also, before we start digging in, understand that this is a beginning point, not an end point. You can use this document as a work scope. You can put it out to bid with this document. You just take the numbers off and put it out to bid. There's enough here to be able to do that, but I'm not sure that's exactly what you want to do yet, because there's some decisions to be made around what we do first, second, and third, and there are always alternative ways to doing things. My philosophy is a preservation philosophy. In other words, I'm trying to save as much as historic fabric as I can, and I'm trying to restore the timber frame both structurally and historically. Those are my two criteria. That does not address necessarily, and you notice that I didn't even put contingencies for electrical and plumbing and infrastructure like that, because you're going to go totally local around that. You're going to go the highest degree of technology that you can, because it simply pays for itself. It's a no-brainer that you're going to get the highest level of that, at which point you do it, right? The technology has changed so dramatically in infrastructure that even if I put a contingency in here, 6 months later it wouldn't mean very much, okay? 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I could put a contingency in and it might be okay for 90 days. Now it's not even good for 30. So it doesn't mean as much as it used to. Doesn't mean you don't need infrastructure upgrades, you do, but they are really transferable by technology by the year, okay? So the numbers that I've developed in here, as I say in the report, are based on projects that are similar to yours, but not identical. In other words, I'm not quoting this. These are budget numbers that you can rely on. I am proud of how accurate I can get based on budgets, but they are budgets. They are not a quote. That doesn't mean I wouldn't be interested in working with you on this project in some capacity. We do that all the time. We are not a big enough community to not have that happen every once in a while, okay? But that said, there's a lot to go over in here, and I know you haven't had as much chance to digest this. Others have. Paul's been with it fine-tooth comb already, and I know he has some questions, and I welcome them, Paul. You know I do, and I thank you for your kind words. We work hard at this. I will also say, before getting into the nitty-gritty, that it took way longer than I anticipated to do this, and I apologize for that. There are many reasons for that, none of which really are relevant at this point. So I would say I'm really pleased that we have this model. So we can talk about sort of the basics, and we can look at the model, we can look at the drawings. It is a fabulous timber frame structure. The basics of this building are, tall walls on a granite foundation, and the roof system is a number of trusses. But in addition to the trusses, which are the bread slices, if you will, Jessica always likes to use the bread slice analogy, where each bend is a bread slice and the space between is a bay. And that's exactly how this was built. But the king post truss in this building is really, really strong in its original form. In your building now, there are issues with that truss that are a result of water infiltration and age and time and foundation settling. So there are structural issues within the truss system, but its basic design is very sound. All right, so we're talking about a series of trusses which are illustrated really well in this model. But the redundancy, which is what I love this about Maine timber frames in general. You see this more mid-state and northern Maine than you do in southern Maine. And the redundancy is this: you have a principal rafter cord here, principal purlin here, with common rafters being supported by that purlin. But in addition, you have this beautiful diamond pattern, what I call a wind brace, and it keeps that roof just perfectly stable in very high winds. This tower sits forward of the first bent and it comes to ground. This is a great way to do a tower. Sometimes they're completely back in the building and every one of those leans back, and that's another night. Right now we have a really solid tower that has to ground loading all the way in the front, and it shares two trusses, the gable and this is of course emulating a truss, but it also has gable end studding, and so it's really strong. My point in showing you this much redundancy is that it just illustrates how strong the building is. Okay, you have every form of roof framing that exists in one roof. All right, you have a truss, you have common rafters, you have principal purlins. It's amazingly strong. And they did that intentionally. And your question was, is it common?
Yeah.
Fact of the matter is, in Maine, throughout our development and our settlement pattern, this was the predominant style of building. The redundancy is prolific in Maine. It's prolific in New Hampshire up to a degree. It gets less and less visible as you get closer and closer to civilization and the seacoast.
I wonder why that is.
I think it's because the modern building techniques came in a little bit faster where more people lived, but not necessarily better. This is as good as it gets, in my
It
opinion.
also has something to do with some of those areas where you get closer to larger populations that have longer history than Maine populations. That
Yes.
there were previous generations of structure type
Yeah,
that had already been established in the 100 years previous. So this is,
you're right, Paul.
so there's an evolutionary application to what we're seeing here as well.
We see the redundancy in this type of timber framing much later as you go away from the coast. Like, you'll see this type of building as late as 1860. This one is 1820. So we have a prolific period of development in Maine, and they held on to their traditions. And this is a perfect example of that. And it's done by a master builder. This is not a farmer or a carpenter. This is a guy that knew how to do trusses. And the execution of this joinery in this building is exceptionally good. It's just that the changes over time based on money, politics, availability, skill set, over time, this building has gotten into some trouble. And we'll talk a lot about that actually. But the basic premise, and where I want to start the conversation, is how good this building is, how long it's lasted because of its excellent construction. Obviously, this building sits on a stone foundation. We can all see it when we walk around the building. We know that this stone foundation is sitting primarily on ledge. So that's good and bad, depending on where water is flowing, right? Typically, you're on the height of hill, water's flowing away, and ledge is a good thing. The problem with it is that the roof water that comes off the roof is landing on that same ledge. And sometimes, in this case, it is starting to move the foundation stones and running under the building and causing all kinds of havoc. So how do you deal with that? We'll talk about drainage and different specific ways to deal with that. But know that the original foundation was, typical of the era. They knew they were on ledge. They thought they had it made. And they did for a long time. It's just that roof water and, we talked about before we started the meeting, this whole road being, elevated road bed, pavement. Water just flows differently now than it used to. And over time, grade builds up and things start to move. That's just true of every building, whether it's new or old. So we have a considerable foundation that is moving a lot, and we have an undercarriage that has seen better days. The undercarriage, which he did not illustrate in this model, is created of a whole series of heavy timber frame elements, I should say, that cross in line with the bent, but also transversely down the center of the building. So really it divided into 3 primary bays this way, and then the 4 bays this way. There are 2 generations of major work underneath. Obviously original construction, perimeter sills, heavy timber undercarriage, half-round log joists, literally a joist that's created out of cutting a sapling down and cutting an end to it and engaging the tie beam. Very typical, very effective. The problem with it is most of the perimeter sills are pretty shot, and what happens when the sills rot is each individual stone then can move a lot more. Now, I know you've read that in the report, but just to talk about how this has gotten to where it is, putting it in context of where we are today. A lot of the movement in the foundation is a direct result of the sills rotting. And the reason that occurs is that when a section of sill rots, the load of the posts can no longer transfer to ground as well. and it starts to creep outwards. And when that pressure is exerted outwards, it has to move the stone. It will move the stone. When you combine that with water coming off the roof and drip line here and water coming in, sort of exaggerating and exacerbating the sill rot, you get this eventual decay all the way around. What happens is the sills rot, and then the undercarriage beams that engage the sills with the same mortise and tenon work that's up here, of the same quality, of the same genre, if you will, no longer are engaged. And a timber frame, you didn't know you're going to get a lesson in timber framing, but it's where I am. So timber frames are point loaded. So every load comes down a post and engages the sill. When that sill rots, that post is going to push out wherever direction it wants to, which is typically out, which has happened here. And because this is no longer connected into the sill and no longer connected into the undercarriage, it doesn't have anywhere to go except out. And so you get more settling. And the more that the building settles, the more the roof comes apart. In other words, the roofing starts to leak, the flashing at the tower starts to, if you think about taking a piece of wire, and if things are moving and that wire's bending, it's going to open up and you get leaks. And over time, that leak becomes, rot at the upper level. Whereas it started down here, and the impact of it is felt finally up here. That, in a nutshell, is what's going on with this building. We have rotten sills, we have a rotten undercarriage, we have a second layer of undercarriage in this case where they did a bunch of repairs and then laid a whole bunch of what I call sticks on top of the original undercarriage and laid a whole new beautiful floor on top of it. And that's what you see when you walk into this building, is you see that nice flat second layer, although it's not quite so flat anymore. But the problem is everything that is on is no longer connected. And when it's not connected, it can't survive that. It has to be repaired. The only access, and I don't know, most of you have not been under this building. It was extremely difficult to get under here. And it's literally on your belly crawling. We all know it's very close to grade, which unto itself is not that bad because you're on ledge. But in this case, it has allowed water in, and it's been an issue. And that can be addressed in a different way. But it is, the only access is through the floor itself. So the only way to repair the undercarriage in a meaningful way is to remove the flooring that's there. And Nicole, I don't remember where the information came from saying that that floor has been sanded to the end of its life. Do you know where that came from? Maybe it was in that.
I think at one point the town looked to have it refinished,
and they were told, okay, okay, yeah. So that means that, that flooring that you're walking on now is not viable for the future anyway. If you're going to put the energy into fixing this building up, you're not going to leave that floor the way it is just because you can't sand it again. But the fact of the matter is, it has to come up in order to do major work in the undercarriage, okay?
As well as the sill.
Well, that's what exactly, yeah. And the perimeter sills are in fact part of the undercarriage. They are absolutely integral to each other, and that floor system is all part of that first layer, okay? And that's what sits on the foundation. We are recommending a new foundation, but I should qualify that by saying that the foundation stones that we have, the capstones that are underneath the building, are perfectly serviceable on a concrete foundation below grade, and they can be reused. But that is a balancing point from an economic perspective and a longevity perspective. I mean, obviously putting a whole new concrete foundation under this building is one way to fix it, but it's also not, it's not traditional. It's not utilizing every ounce of original material that you can. But we do know from the photographs in our investigation that a lot of the foundation stones are sort of infilled with rubble. So there's not enough capstones to go all the way around, but there are enough to have above grade if you wanted it. And I think that's worth considering because it's a very sound foundation as long as it can't move and as long as the water is dissipated. So using the capstones that you have are completely within the parameters of doing good preservation, but you supplement that with below grade frost protection with concrete. That means lifting the building up to do that. Lifting the building up in this state can be done, and we do it all the time, and it's somewhat counterintuitive, but we did recommend lifting this building. In order to lift the building, we usually utilize a grid of steel and what is called a manifold. A manifold is hydraulic jacks that all work in unison in one pick. And that's the best way to hold this building up while we do the foundation. The issue with that is you don't necessarily fix the undercarriage yet. Typically, and this is where the counterintuitive comes to mind, when I'm a builder, when I think about lifting a building up, I'm lifting a whole bunch of rotten sills and I'm putting back down and then I got to change out the sills. That is counterintuitive, but it is also necessary. You can pick this building up at this level, and we may consider that. This can be done at this level and we leave the undercarriage. We're doing that up at the Shaker Village this year on the herb house. We're literally picking up the entire herb house, which is their primary economic driver. It's where the Shakers still make a bunch of herbs, and that's their primary income. But we're picking up their herb house and we're redoing the whole undercarriage, taking it right away and rebuilding it because it's really rotted. That's an option here and probably covered in the finances that I've talked about. So that's a second way of doing it. Typically, if it's a barn, we'll just lift the barn up rotten, throw a bunch of cribbing at it here and there, put it back down on the foundation. The advantage of doing that is now you're on a level plane. And then you can go around the building and fix the sills. And that's a great way to do it. But sometimes it's so gone, and this is borderline, where you pick it up higher and then replace everything. I'm getting into the weeds a little bit there, and we're nowhere near that yet. But I wanted to give you the overview of where we're at with regards to the foundation and the sills. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. As we rise up through the building, and you know, I had Jessica up in the attic while I was crawling around in the cellar, so we're hitting this from both sides. But while I was downstairs figuring out the undercarriage and looking at the perimeter foundation, Jessica was really delving into the roof system because this is where we see a lot of trouble. I mean, we know this is a problem area, especially where the tower meets. We were pleasantly surprised, not surprised, but pleasantly informed with regards to how much work had been done. You guys have done a ton of work on this building over time, and you've done it in a way that's more or less sustainable. The tower work is completely new from here up, and a whole bunch of this has been reworked with modern materials with pretty good success. And we talk about that in the report at length. The issue here is that it must have been pretty darn bad for him to go to the extent that he did in the 90s to repair it in the way that he did. Now, he was sort of a one-man band. We know this from the articles that the newspaper articles tell us that he did most of this work by himself. That is a lot to ask of one person, given the forces and the level of damage that he found when he got in there. That said, he did a damn good job. He really did. We do talk about reinforcing these areas because we want, one thing we know about this overall frame is that its original design worked really super well as long as it didn't get rotten. So we typically reproduce the original form and the original design in order to affirm that design, because typically it'll pass muster, even engineering. This tower will pass modern engineering as far as compression. Sometimes we have to add some tension, things like that, and we can talk more about that. But the tower's doing pretty well in its current form. It does need some bolstering, and we do talk about that. As we get into the trusses, this truss obviously takes load from the tower on these beams here. Second truss doing pretty well. It needs obviously new sheathing. This bay here is pretty bad off with the sheathing because of the leaks that were, that preceded his work, right? He went, did a bunch of repair work and fixed his flashing. But they're starting to open up, the flashing details are starting to open up again. And some of this was probably not repaired during this work, but it was impacted prior to his work. Okay, so I'm kind of going back and forth in time here. The fact of the matter is this bay needs work near the tower, and the second bay is doing pretty well. We know we have an older roof on the building right now, but when the damage that I'm about to talk about here and here and here definitely precedes this roof. All right, so at some point, a lot of water was coming in, probably before the whole interior was done. It's really hard to say exactly when, but we do have structural damage in these upper reaches. Vents 3 and 4, according to our drawings, and these are referenced. They each have, if you look at the drawings, you will see how we've numbered it. The walls and the trusses. Page 6 shows that. In 11, on page 11, we're starting to look at vent 3 and vent 4. And you can see in green, because I use a color code for repair and replace, like red is red for replacement, as you can see the color code in the lower left-hand corner. And then you'll see green, and you'll see a lot of green in here. These are repairs to those two trusses that are in place currently, okay? That means they knew there was an issue, and they did their best to hold it up and hold it together. The problem with the repairs that we see is that they don't address the area of rot that they were hoping to ignore. Not ignore, but they weren't really capable or willing to go to the extent of actually fixing the timber frame. And when you do this kind of repair, you get years of life, but you don't get, it's still an issue. It's still an issue for the longevity of the building. And remember how we talked about earlier, how all the timber frame works together? It can't work as well when there's this much damage this high, okay? So again, you're getting a very biased opinion and a very traditional approach to the repair of this building. Biased in the sense that I am a true preservationist, not a purist. I want the building used and I want it to be done practically and economically. But when I see a timber frame that is this damaged and with this level of repair, I'm inclined to do it traditionally again because it works so well.
So Arron, one of the things that came to mind to me in reviewing the attic structure is a lot of the repair work that has been done since the building was built to mitigate some of these issues.
Yeah.
Have been done without an understanding of how the structure actually works together.
Yeah.
So although the repairs have stopped things from coming apart vertically, they've also disrupted by taking roof load and putting it in places it doesn't
Yep.
belong, and they literally are exacerbating the problem now. So
You're absolutely right to a degree. What I find when I look at these kind of repairs is that they did the best with the knowledge they had and the money they had at the time. So we have to be thankful for this.
right.
But it does pose a challenge. You're going to go backwards before you go forwards. Like if we're making a long-term repair of this roof system, this has to come out. The new repairs are going to have to come out. We have to hold it up a different way. But to your point, Paul, the idea is to reestablish the load paths.
Correct.
Because as soon as you do this kind of repair and you overload the rafter in a way that it's not intended to be loaded, then you start pushing loads all throughout the building. And so what happens is, and this is the great thing about a timber frame, when you have a damaged area like this, like in vent 3 and vent 4, the loads disperse. They go elsewhere. That doesn't happen in a stick frame. You get catastrophic failure in a building like that. If that had a roof problem, it would just fall through, okay? I'm not going to talk about that building anymore. But my point being is that this works a really long time before it fails. I typically talk about buildings melting, like they melt into the landscape rather than collapse. We are not in a condition where we have imminent collapse, But if we don't address it, it will continue to melt into the landscape. And that is a problem if you're doing public access. You can't leave it alone, guys, if you're gonna have public access. We have to do something with this building. That said, I never put down the repairs that people have tried to do. And I commend them for doing it, because this is a terrible place to work. It's really hot, or it's really cold, and it's really dark, and there's plenty of bat shit, you know? That said, we do have truss cord issues in the center of this truss and this truss. We have principal purlin issues here and here. We have common rafters that need to be replaced. This is all illustrated in the drawings and all described in the work, in the body of the report. There's also photos to go with it. So when you have nothing else to do in your life, you can keep going through this. And I know you all have things to do. Like, I know you have another meeting very shortly, because she just took off. That said, so we have work to do throughout this building. I mean, the culmination of this investigation is that we have a lot of work to do. And so how do we do it? And I think that is the biggest challenge moving forward. We do know how to fix it, but it's how we go about fixing it, who fixes it, and how much money is it going to cost, and how does that money come in? And that's where I think probably some of your questions are. I think relatively easy to understand that we have a lot to do here, and that we have to approach this in a way that is, you know, structurally sound. Obviously, we can't use the building effectively if we don't have a good, solid structure, because code enforcement won't let us, you know? I mean, they're not going to condemn this building, and I can write a letter all day if someone felt that way, to say that this building you can inhabit this building, but it needs a lot of work. It needs a lot of help. If we don't do something, if we don't take some action in the next year or two, especially in the next year with the roof, then we're going to be a lot more trouble. And that gets only more expensive. So there is some action. Yep.
So would you actually put the roof on before you repaired the timber frame area?
Yes and no. It's a really good question. We always want to keep a tight roof on, and we know that this one is not quite tight. The issue is, to put a tight roof on, we probably need to do this high work, or it will be redundant and we'll have to open it up again. So just throwing a roof at this is not the entire solution, but sooner than later it is. When I thought about, and this may not come across in the report as clearly as I would like it, so that's what I've been thinking about since Nicole asked for this meeting. I want to talk about the priority work that can happen, and therefore develop a budget that, and a timeline, if you will, on how you go about fixing this building.
Because that brings up a question I'd have.
Yeah.
Is best case scenario, if we had $1.4 million ready to go, what would be your time frame from getting ready to jack that up to do the work? What are we looking at for 24 months?
Oh, it's at
5
least
years?
it's at least a year.
Yeah.
If you were to have your funding in place and you were going to go after this building, it would be 12 months minimum. And that's partly because you have to go in succession, right? You're going to lift, and then you're going to do foundation, and all of those have time frames of their own. But overall, you could get this done in a year with a crew that was ready to come in after the previous crew. That doesn't always happen. We all know that. So give it 18 months. I don't think it's 5 years. I don't think it's 2 years if you had the budget. But how do we do it if we don't have the budget? Because this is what we're facing, right? I mean, every town in Maine is facing this exact same thing.
One of the dilemmas is the town owns this.
Right.
So you want people to donate, but well, the town owns it. When the Historical Society owns something, it's different.
It can feel different, you're right.
This is the big elephant in the room.
Yeah.
And, the town is doing other things and having other stuff and spending money and not spending money on this. So this is the dilemma right here.
Yeah. Well, I was pleased when we talked earlier about the fact that this committee was formed, by the select board to really delve into this. And that's a great way to get good information back to the select board. But you're right, this is a town project. That can be a hindrance or it can be a huge advantage depending on how you want to proceed. I mean, when you say the town, it's everyone's. But it doesn't feel the same when you give to a historical society as it might
Yeah.
to a town. So how do other towns get around that? This is where, I mean, I've worked throughout New England. This is how we do it. You have a committee like this, good core, understand the whole thing, going to pretty much be involved throughout the building process. You don't get away from it just because we get done here. You know, there's going to be a whole liaison piece. But typically what we'll do, if I say we, a way to proceed is a friends group that is a nonprofit piece, can be involved with the town. Sometimes it can be the town. If you tell your townspeople what you're trying to do, and this is the crew that's going to do that, then they will rally. Okay? The best way to rally them is to have a good plan, which is why we're here, is to develop that plan. When you have sort of a nebulous, God, we got to do something, but we don't know what it is, how's the select board supposed to react to that? It's impossible. You've got to have better information. Hopefully this is a pathway. But a lot of times, especially to answer your question, you know, sometimes we're an active congregation of 8 that own a building of this size. And I've seen success. Troy, Maine has a beautiful little church on there, and there was literally 8 people in the congregation. So what did they do? Well, they started talking about it in the town. The townspeople rallied around them because it's their church. It goes way beyond the core group. People do have a sense of ownership around this stuff, but you have to name it, you have to quantify it, and then you have to wait. You have to get some money to come in. The town, you know, most towns can't just fund a building like this. They're gonna, you know, you're gonna get anybody and his brother to talk about taxes, right? You're gonna spend money, the town's gonna spend money on this instead of lowering my tax. The only way that flies is if they own this, like they have ownership here. And the only way for them to acquire that ownership is for them to understand it the same way you're beginning to understand it.
It's very symbolic of Bowdoinham. It's on
It's,
all of, I mean.
it's symbolic of Maine.
Yeah.
This goes way beyond Bowdoinham, okay?
No,
This,
I mean, this building is almost like a symbol for Bowdoinham. It's on all the logos.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
it is the most, to me, the most significant historical building of Bowdoinham. And some people might disagree, but.
there's beautiful buildings in Bowdoinham, and more than this one, but this one is clearly very important for, I mean, is this on the town seal?
It's on the
Yeah.
town seal.
So it's been recognized as one of the most important buildings in town for a really long time. Wouldn't know it necessarily, looking at it.
And part of the problem too is this whole ambience of this little thing has been changed by this.
I know.
right here.
Yeah,
That's
it's,
Yeah,
a
we're
real
not gonna
problem.
get into that discussion.
no, but it is a hurdle, and it's
It
worth
is.
recognizing. Yeah,
From the fundraising part of the whole thing, we're having to deal with that.
Yeah,
Yep.
we'll have to figure that one out.
yeah,
So Arron, let's speak a little bit to sequencing.
Yeah.
In regards to finances. So we
Yeah.
have 2 major issues, the top and the bottom.
yeah, basically.
Everything in between, which is mostly air, is actually in pretty good shape.
And it is, and it can wait.
Yes.
Right,
You
so-
talked about
Yeah.
insulation, your idea of
Yeah.
insulation.
and-
Yeah, we're gonna definitely
we're
talk about
gonna- We're
insulation.
gonna get into
Yeah,
that. So essentially, where we're at this point, if I'm hearing you right, is that we need to get the base structure done first. And that will then allow the proper support necessary to open the roof up and do the roof.
Yeah,
But that's sort of caveated by the fact that we have a lot of infiltrating bulk water from the top
Right.
and the bottom. They're both
they,
infiltrating water.
it
and
is
they're-
passing through this
Right.
building from the top and the bottom. Yep,
And
it
so
is.
we're winding up with a continuing deterioration environment while
Yeah.
we try to raise funds to stop a continuing deterioration environment. So
It is redundant in that
it
way.
is a
yeah.
little bit. So
Yeah.
it seems to me that if, with as much of the roof structural work that needs to be done, you know, going for a Class A roof is probably not a smart approach. Perhaps doing some really sort of simple lightweight asphalt
Mhm,
water protection to keep the
mhm.
bulk water from coming in,
Mhm.
get the flashing stuff taken care of where it's leaking, and then it's an umbrella in a windstorm, but it is an umbrella, right?
Right.
And then move from there back down to the bottom,
Yeah,
get that secured, then move back to the top.
yeah,
And it's likely with the way that the finances are gonna go, we're gonna be a number of years between
Yeah.
those two anyway.
Yeah.
So perhaps a 15-year roof that costs 20 grand for now, or 30 grand, gives us that time.
yeah.
And it's half wasted by the time we get to take it off to replace it
Well-
with the right stuff anyway.
Right, what you're talking about is balancing that redundancy, right? If we're gonna do a temporary measure, we want it to be, I want it to work, and I don't wanna spend a lot of money on it because it's temporary, right? So I've given that a lot of thought in regards to, what is going to be the most effective, least redundant first step, you know? And Jess and I like stand in the attic and talk about this for hours. I mean, this has been one of the reasons, mostly my schedule, but one of the reasons that this has taken so long is we've really thought about what is going to be the first initial step, because I have not stood before a group like this with anyone that ever could just say, let's just do it. That's just not how it happens. It's too much. It's a lot of money. So my initial thought here with regards to not being overly redundant is to do some of the work in the roof plane. In other words, the principal rafters and the common rafters, because we really can't put even an asphalt roof on that without addressing that. We can, however, do some temporary stabilization because we're basically eventually going to pick this up on structural staging and do the major work on it. But for now, we could work with perhaps a few well-placed posts to hold things up a little bit better that would allow us to do this it's not minor. There's nothing about this building that's minor, okay? But to do this roof work at this plane in order to do a roof, I think that is a really high priority for this structure, especially if we're looking at a 3 to 5 year time frame with regards to fundraising, which is not unreasonable. It's not.
So would you do that work from the top side, or would you
Yes.
actually pull the roof that's existing there now, do all your purlin and stuff from top side,
You would.
repeg all that stuff, and
Yeah.
then throw your sheathing and a roof on?
Yep. In fact, I'll take it one step further. What we've talked about here is fixing these elements here that are clearly deteriorated and really can't even accept an asphalt roof, but not wholesale removing all the sheathing. I was never talking about a wholesale removal of the entire roof cover sheathing. What I'm talking about is opening this up enough to do this repair work, closing it in with new, and then doing another layer. And the second layer is what allows you to put an asphalt roof on this. You cannot put an asphalt roof on this sheathing
Correct.
and have it hold. You must do another layer. But that means stripping the roof, and that's not a small project, but is way smaller than the overall project. And it'll give you 20 years.
And it's
Not
the
that you want to wait
foundation.
that long.
It's also the foundation you'll need for the new roof when it comes 20 years from now, and you want
Right.
to put the Cadillac on there, you've got the
Yep.
structure to support it.
Exactly. The structural work that needs to occur in bench 4 and 5, pardon me, is in the center of the truss. And right now, this is not holding it well, and we would bolster this. So the first initial phase would include the top side work of, the framing and a new roof and new flashings. You're still in a couple $100,000. It's not 50, okay? It's not 50. It's not gonna happen that way. So you still have a significant investment, but when you consider it against the overall 1.4 that I've estimated here, that's a pretty reasonable first step, and it's not too redundant. And that's what you can sell. Like, you gotta do something, right? Something's gotta happen to this building. I'm looking at you because you're on the select board. But I can look at all of you, okay? But yeah, the buck's gotta stop with the select board here at some point. This is not a small investment even for the initial first phase. I wish I could say it was different, but it isn't. The thing is, this is continuing to deteriorate, but I can hold this in stasis and put a roof on it. I say I, it can be done. I keep saying I because I'm standing here and it's me,
Yeah.
but I'm not the only person that can do this.
So
Okay.
another advantage to that approach, Aaron, that I see, because of the way that a timber frame sort of addresses load, once you replace some of those members in the top, they help support the bottom, because now you
They
have
do.
a full-frame diaphragmatic
Yeah.
lid that anything else that's trying to go down isn't carrying it all principally to itself. As
Yeah.
soon as you get a small movement and failure in one post, it's gonna
Yeah.
migrate the load to the other posts that are
It-
still
it
holding the
does.
load.
But if they're solid, you could pull a foundation block out and it shouldn't move if everything was whole.
Right, oh yeah, yeah, no, each piece, you can open this up in certain areas and it will hold, it will sustain itself. The issue here is, and this is always the issue when we phase this work, is we know that this is settled, we know the building is not perfectly true, right? So when we do this work, we have to accommodate for that.
Correct.
We have to think about that, we have to look at what the lengths are. The building will tell us what the length should be. Whether or not we can get it to that point is restricted by this layer. I think we get it very close, even though this layer is damaged down below. Enough so that we can put on a roof that will survive a lot of manipulation down the road. You can get your full 20 years out of this roof, because we can come back and fix that truss cord from inside. You know, come up through the ceiling or just work in the attic. What we can't do is fix this stuff with the roof covering on it. You just,
That new sheathing, would that be just plywood that you'd be putting on? or-
I typically just go with another layer of 1 inch, you know, like shiplap. Tighten it up. You can use plywood. It's not out of the question. It's just that when I think about putting plywood on this, the best way to sheathe this roof is to land on the common rafters. And if you were to plywood this, and this happens all the time, when you throw a piece of plywood on, it lands right there. And then you've got this lovely seam that they just drill with gun nails, and you're drilling into ancient sheathing. So,
And you would just go crosswise?
yep, this original sheathing goes this way.
Yeah.
And you would stagger the joint, but you'd begin again, and another layer of I usually use shiplap, and the reason I do is because it's very straight and it just overlaps a little bit. And most of the asphalt guys will put a roof on that. Some will insist on plywood, but that's only because that's all they ever do. It's not because it won't hold in wood.
So some of the other advantages to a plywood, I mean, a natural wood roof, a shiplap wood roof, is it has a lot more ability for hydrothermal loading. It can hold a lot more water without rotting.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay, plywood is less hydric, and chipboard is almost
It's-
hold no water.
No, it's
Before
terrible.
it starts to deteriorate.
Yeah,
So you
yeah.
get a lot of deterioration protection
Yeah.
from regular wood.
See, that's what my roof is shiplap.
Yeah.
Yep.
yeah,
They
So
were
it can-
amazed at how-
so even if there are issues down the road, or we still have a little bit of condensation or things happening inside the structure, it's not gonna rot. You
It's-
have to get to the hydrothermic peak in order for
Yeah.
mold to start to take over and rot the structure. It can hold a lot of water.
It's also a lot more malleable than plywood. Plywood, and sometimes we'll do plywood like in a shear wall, where we must have that rigidity, and engineers love plywood because it's engineered, and we understand that, and sometimes it's necessary. Here, it would be a hindrance later. And one of the things I'm trying not to do in this case is make a problem for myself or someone that's coming back to do this. If this roof is plywood, then it's so rigid that I probably will never be able to lift it and straighten it. And that's not what we want.
Yeah, you don't wanna lock.
When
it in.
you, right, when you finally straighten this roof system and it's on shiplap and maybe a little bit of your asphalt is buckled, you can just patch that. You're not gonna lose the whole roof by straightening this building, not an asphalt roof. Metal, different. You know, maybe eventually you want to put standing seam on that, and I would not do that until we were fixed down here. It's just as simple as that. That would be the crown.
Yeah, that's
You
the
know,
finished product.
That's the finished crown, you know, you're opening up the building and it's wonderful and everybody's happy, you know. But yeah, so metal roof would not be a good alternative now, but it would be a very good roof later. It does pose its own issues. Asphalt here is obviously not traditional, whereas the metal is, you know, it's probably had a metal roof on it for a long, long time. It's not original. It was wood shingles originally. Wood shingles are great, they're probably still there, probably gonna find some. And that's a malleable roof, just like the sheathing is malleable. You can patch a wood shingle roof with relative ease. Metal is less forgiving, but it is an appropriate roof historically for this building. And I highly recommend it on repaired buildings because it doesn't hold snow load, you know? Yeah, exactly.
I know that.
So, but that doesn't address some of the other issues that we need to talk about tonight. Thank you. Good to see you. Obviously, the long-term solution for this building includes a new foundation, whether we use the granite capstones or not. I lean towards using the granite capstones. I think it has an aesthetic piece that's really important for the history of the building. But it is an area where you could lower the budget if you just did a concrete foundation. And everyone would not recall the granite at some point, but you know, it's not, from a preservation perspective, I would love to see the granite reused, but that's a balance on the budget. It's a budget item for sure. The other issues that are obviously going to come into play is, you know, what you do for a new floor, what you do for repairing the exterior fabric, including the clapboards and the trim and the windows, and all of those are included in the report. They again are budget items. I did not reach out to a window restorer. I went off previous projects, but it's close. You can use it for fundraising for sure. And then when you're ready to do it, you're going to dial it in with the specific person. They're going to quote it based on a set of specifications. Whether that's 2 years from now or 5 years from now, hopefully it's not more than 5 years. I mean, honestly, from a fundraising perspective, that 5-year time frame is ideal because it's fresh in everyone's memory. You get beyond 5 years, people get fatigued with you're never going to end up doing it. So that you got to balance that a little bit. It's not impossible though. I have gone 8 or 9 years with a church in New Hampshire, and they are still plugging away, and they do a little bit each year, and they are being successful. But this is the first year in 8 years that they've been able to go inside the building. So you are not alone. It's not ideal, but it can occur, and it does occur, and they are successful. But it's a haul. It's a haul.
So, in doing all the upper work, is the building still usable?
Yes.
Or- okay.
Yes, throughout all of this, the building can be usable until you get to the floor. When you pull up the floor, you can't be in there. You know, obviously when you lift it up, you know, those pieces, but this work is all from above in the first phase. So the building is relatively untouched everywhere else, including the interior, and still very much accessible. And I would encourage you to use it as much as possible. You're not going to go through this floor. No one's going through the floor and landing in this. First of all, you'd only go up to your knees. And second of all, it's just not how it's going to happen. You know, there is no imminent danger here unless we don't do anything. You are definitely not alone in this. And it can be successful. It's like, but knowing what you got to do is the first step. And that's why I'm really pleased that you hired us to do this assessment. It is hard to know. Right? It's hard to know how things are, but it's better than not knowing when it comes to actually getting the town to rally around you. But you are in for a task. This is not an easy thing to do, and it's not an easy thing for people to understand. But it is iconic, and it's worth the effort. You will succeed if you engage in it and move forward. You will find people come out of the woodwork to support you. You know, sometimes in name only, but most of the time they're going to put something up. I mean, I've seen it happen again and again. We've seen small congregations rebuild out of nothing, you know. So I do think that your concern about its town ownership is a hurdle and a little bit of a tricky piece, but I think it's solvable. I just think it has to be thought through. And if the town can take the initial action with regards to the roof, that's a huge success for the town. And then you start generating momentum, and that's how this happens. You know, that is how it happens. It doesn't happen all at once. The town's never going to put the 1.4 up for this
So,
without a fundraising
the temporary stuff that you would do on the top with the asphalt roof,
Yeah.
I don't think I saw a figure for that.
Yes, it is in here, it is under, and hopefully you have the right one, because I do have it in the report. If we go to the summary, page 14 is the summary itself, but if you back up to page, oh yeah, there it is, page 13. I did send a second version, so you may have an earlier version, but it should be on page 13 of this.
Oh, this, okay.
Yeah, yeah. On page 13, I carried a metal roofing cost. That 60,000 puts a metal roof on this all day. An asphalt roof is going to be probably 30 to 40. So it's less than what I've estimated. But that does not include the structural work, which is outlined earlier. So just for the sake of argument, if you're using this document as a working document, you can look at page 12, and you can look at bay 3 and bay 4, and then the roof covering, and that's essentially your first initial phase. So bay 3 is 52. I'm on page 12. Can you find us?
Yep.
Okay, so page 12 shows the bay 3. Bay 2, you probably could get away without bay 2. I mean, ideally we do the bay work starting on page 12 with bay 1, 2, 3, and 4.
So it would be, instead of 216,000, if you were doing asphalt, minus another 30,000 from that.
Yeah, I mean, roof framing I've separated from the trusses. And so the 220 includes a roof covering, but that is basically a metal roof cost.
Yeah.
So you're probably, I mean, I said earlier, it's a couple hundred to do that work and do it well so that it lasts, you know? So I think that's your initial budget for your highest priority. And we can define this even clearer if that's, you know, if you needed more specifications to put it out to bid, it'd be easy enough to generate from that. But I think that budget item, around 200 for roof framing, is where you have to start on this building. Now, here's where we can make an economic difference. And this is something, and we're still going to get into some nitty-gritty on insulation and stuff, but we're down the road on that, Paul. You know, it's not the first thing we're going to do, you know?
We have plenty of time to develop.
Right, exactly, exactly. So let's talk about how do we, I mean, the estimates that I provided you are based on my company coming up, because I have no other frame of reference. My insurances are much higher than many and most local contractors, because I do heavy-duty structural timber framing. I'm holding church steeples up. So my costs are considerably higher than some of the local craftspeople around here. I have a specific skill set that demands that, and I have all the insurance to go with it. That said, what we have done successfully in towns like yours, throughout Maine and New Hampshire primarily, is worked with a local contractor, and I know we touched on this earlier, where and typically your average good carpenter exists in town. There are good carpenters in this town. They are busy if they're good, and they are often intimidated by a project of this size because they're one or two people. What we have had success with is reaching out to them, providing them with a clear specification, and backing them up, okay? Like I might come in and pick up that truss with my structural staging so they could do the roof. But you don't have to pay me to strip that roof, and the costs that are in here include me stripping the roof. And that might be that we still do the bulk of the work, but we still use a local person or two or four, and we get that prep work done, and obviously it's not going to be me that puts the $60,000 roof on. You're going to hire someone locally for that, and you're going to get it for half that. Partly because that's what they command for their price, and they don't have the same insurance that I do, and partly because they live in town and they want to help you out. And that's the community development piece that gets this done down the road. And I say that with all seriousness. This is the way to get this done for it's still gonna cost a lot of money.
So the 200,000 is the upper,
200
upper limit,
and-
upper estimation is what you're saying? basically.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
Keep in mind, it's an estimate, which means.
Oh, and I realize.
Right.
Because that means
Right.
there's a high and low, and he's aimed at the middle, and
Yeah.
so any surprises go on,
And
and.
the
Right.
problem is also with time.
Right, correct.
Do we
Right.
go up?
Just,
Do we continue
Yeah.
going up? I
just
just,
so
I
long as
just,
people understand, there's
Yeah.
a difference between an estimate and a
Yeah.
quote. This isn't
Yeah.
a quote, it's an estimate.
yeah,
It's
I
a-
just.
it's a
spent-
budget, guys, it's a
It's an
fundraising
assessment
budget.
of a reasonable cost, this
Yeah.
isn't an exact.
Spent $1,000 on 8 bundles of shingles. Now, and I had to have them because
Right.
they were clear and they were beautiful. Damn it all, I had to have them for insurance because I couldn't find them anywhere else.
Yeah,
And they may go down, I don't care.
Right.
I had to have them,
Right.
basically.
yeah,
But to
exactly.
pay $120 for each one of those bundles, I mean, I'm looking at each shingle and going, well, are you worth $4 or $5?
The thing,
Scrape
yes.
a little off the bat.
Yeah, it is really difficult right now to even budget things because it's still pretty haywire out there. But the thing is, it is calming down, I absolutely agree with that. But the thing is, the more local you can be, the more reliable that number will be if they're qualified to do the work. You will get folks that will come out and they will say they can do it and they won't be able to do it. That's not where you want to be. That's partly of how we got here, okay? That is not a put down, it's just a fact. Some people are not skilled enough to do it, but say they are. So how do you vet them? I vet them with you. That's how you vet them. That's the service that we can provide for a very reasonable amount of time to help you determine if the skill set is there.
So
It's
you're
not,
acting like a contractor, basically,
I am acting as a preservation
consultant.
I'm writing a few specs. It's a couple of paragraphs beyond this report. It's a little more detailed for the specific work that we're doing. And here's where this is where I've seen it really succeed. When we reach out to the first, the most local first, you will find someone that is capable of doing it, but doesn't feel like they are. But if you give them enough information and you know that they can call you at any point. We're doing this at Bell Hill, a few towns away. We're working with a really good general contractor who does mostly houses, and he is intimidated, and we're backing him up. And he's going in and he's going to do the work. We're not doing the work, and he's a lot less than I am. That's just, because he lives there. I mean, I'm coming from Berwick. It's almost 2 hours here. You do not want to pay my travel expenses to do that job. Not when there's someone in town that is capable of doing 90% of it. This is another task, however. It lands on your shoulders to find those people, right? I can't find those people for you. You're going to reach out and start, but I can help you figure out who can do it. And they will come. They live here. There are really good people that live here. And if you put them together, they can do more than they think they can. This is what we've found over and over again. And it gives me great encouragement when that happens, because we've elevated their skill set. You've elevated your resource, right? This isn't the only building in town that needs that skill set, So, and this is how I get more work done, honestly. I mean, it serves me because I can't possibly do all of these projects. It serves you because you're keeping it local. And honestly, a guy that lives in town that is capable of following a specification for that roof, he's going to donate for the next 20 years. He put the roof on. You can't buy that. That isn't some guy out of Portland. He's not going to donate every year, So it's a long-term investment, but it's well worth making, in my opinion. And I have seen it succeed very well. Does it cut this cost in half? No, it doesn't. It might be a wash financially. It might be a wash.
10%.
The issue is the person that did the work lives here, and that's the value. There's value
There's
to that.
ownership in it, and that's
It-
an
yeah.
important thing. And it's important for the town's approach
Yep.
to look to our corporate community.
Yes,
to
especially,
involve as much as we're able and as much as they're able.
yeah,
first, and
Yeah.
that's gonna be our first priority, and I
It-
would definitely agree with that. But
Yeah.
we're also
Yeah.
agree with you that having the skill set necessary to assess someone's ability is gonna be critical.
Right.
And, cause not, you're right, a lot of folks will say, yeah, I can do it.
Yeah.
They really, and I applaud their enthusiasm too.
I do too.
Without having enough time and
Right.
in this type of system,
Yeah.
it doesn't, there's so much more here that you can't see
Right.
when you look at it.
Right.
You have to know those things in order to approach it.
And there's a couple of young bucks that just started out and they don't know shit. They don't know anything, but they're willing, they don't know what they don't know, but they're willing to learn.
As long as they know they don't
And
know.
that's
you
half
got
the
it.
battle.
Right.
That's half that battle.
You got somebody that's willing to learn and knows that they don't know, but is excited to learn.
Right,
Now
right.
you got the right people on
Yeah,
board. And
exactly.
And I'm pretty sure we can find some of those.
I'm pretty sure they're here already.
Well,
Let's
I
start
think-
down at the pub.
Yeah, you could do some research,
I think
right?
we have a lot of older carpenters in this town.
We do.
I'm hoping we have younger carpenters
There's
too.
a few.
Yeah, there's.
Well, wouldn't it be great to pair a couple up?
Right.
You know, a couple guys that have done everything, maybe the wrong way, maybe not, you know, but, you know, if they're willing to just be next to somebody and they're willing to listen, you know, to you, like this, I'm only a vehicle for you, they're gonna listen to you, they're not gonna necessarily listen to me. But I think we can form, the reason that I do this product is that you can then take it to job specifications. You can and that's half the battle when a homeowner reaches out for someone to do their roof and they have no idea what an asphalt shingle is, they're in a very bad place, right? They could be taken, not always, but they could be taken advantage of, right? It happens. Not gonna happen here because you have a plan and you have specifications and then you can apply their skill set to that
You
spec.
guys understand the specification part?
Yeah.
Part of doing large projects like this is you write a spec. You
Right.
Specify the material types,
Yep,
qualities. So there's literally a book that comes with a set of drawings that's always called the spec book in the business.
Yeah.
And you go through that and that really outlines the specifics about how you approach the work, what the quality of work that will be required, what the quality of the materials will be required, and so on. So and that's what the contractor or the carpenter needs to follow,
Yeah.
that specification outline. Then that informs him about how it is he approaches the work.
and to just follow that same thought, that is not a boilerplate. Like you look at a set of architectural specs and engineering, most of it is just boilerplate. This could take from that job, put it at this job, is the same, we're just doing another Costco. That is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about specifically addressing each and every element in this report and just expanding upon it and putting real information there, you know, that they can use, that a layman carpenter, someone that doesn't do this every day but still knows his way around a hammer and a saw, can do it. And I'm very proud of being able to do that.
It's not
Not
IKEA.
everybody can do it, huh?
It's not IKEA.
Right, it's not necessarily a step-by-step.
Right.
That is something different. When we get into heavy-duty structural stuff and we're working with someone that has not done that, we will do a step-by-step. And you have to pay me to do a step-by-step, but we can do that if we need to. Don't always need to. The issue is you gotta get a few guys in the room and then you gotta talk it through. And it's gonna be painfully obvious who is capable and who is not. It's not that hard to tell.
And we have some folks involved at this level of the project already that have a lot of those skills necessary to assess who we're talking to.
Yeah, I think so too. You already know who's good in town.
Yeah,
You just ask around.
yeah, we'll be able to find out who we're gonna sit down with
Yep.
and have these conversations and
Right.
meaningful. The hardest part for us, I think, in some of this is, in dealing with local folks, is the start, stop, start, stop, start, stop. We're not gonna have, typically, we don't usually have large chunks of funds. And
Yeah,
we
yeah.
wanna have a continued relationship with who we start, so it may be we have enough for 6 weeks worth of work, and then we may not see it for a year, right? And
Well-
that can get a little tricky.
Yeah, it can really hamper a project, actually. That's going to be the biggest hurdle, I think, from a fundraising perspective, is that not only are you trying to, integrate a local group, for less money. Let's face it, they're going to do it for less than I can do it, or anyone. I mean, any large firm coming in is going to be more expensive than your local source, just by the fact of geography, nothing else. But what you have to do ahead of that discussion with the people you may be able to use, you need to have that first priority. You need to have some money in hand.
Right.
You cannot say, oh, well, you can't do that roof. You can't do the roof 6 weeks now and 6 weeks later. You have to divide the tasks before you into logical timeframes, because that is part of the spec. You set the expectation that they're not going to do 3 other jobs that take them a year to do that roof. That is not at all acceptable on any. You can't make money that way. If you're a small guy, you can't make money doing 4 jobs at once. You need to do 1 with those other 3 waiting for you, so you have some place to go. And yes, there's always a balance there, but honestly, these part of the spec will be setting that expectation, you know, on the time frame that it's going to take, and you will draw a contract up saying from June 1st to August 30th that you're going to be doing this roof. You know, I'm not saying it takes 2 months, 3 months to do. It doesn't, but it's going to take some time. Anyway, I offer that as a means to be thoughtful about who is available in town, to justify the expense by using local contractors, and justifying it with the select board to say, look, you know, we're going to use local people for this, and they're paying taxes, and this is their building. I mean, you can't really argue with that, you know? Now that he's left, we can talk about that.
Well, there are other issues going on in town, one with
Of
the
course.
recycling barn and whatnot. And the town wants to throw a lot of money at just plans and, you
Yeah.
know, 80,000, 90, and
Yeah.
this is a problem. Because people look at that and go, well, you can invest money here, why can't you invest money here?
Sure,
And-
I think
and
it's a
my
legitimate
sister,
question.
who's with the Historical Society, she hasn't gotten anyone to donate. Well, except for the lady I took care of her cats
Mm-hmm.
and whatever, but I take care of her cats to have her do that.
One of the, yeah, no, I mean, I know. I mean, I understand that is a dilemma. One of the things, again, why we produce these documents is that this is a way to tell people that you have taken action and that we have a path. And anyone that has capacity for fundraising, like someone that has money that could give it to you, requires this level.
Right, that's right.
They are not going to give you money if you just say, oh, we got to do something.
We're
You know.
not gonna finance this with grassroots money. It's not gonna be nickel and dime. We're gonna have to go after grants and things like that.
Yep,
And
this
this kind of
grants-
document
Yep.
allows us to go after grants.
Yeah.
Right.
It gives us real.
And donors that have the capacity to do it. They expect this level. And it's been-
This was the right first step for us. And
I
then
hope
we-
so.
We hesitated
Yeah.
really getting into the meat of anything else until we
Yeah.
had this in our hands.
Right,
Because of the value it adds to what we do.
yeah,
It also informs a lot of how we move forward.
yeah,
And so it was, you know, in our early discussions, when we first started this committee, this was decided very quickly as being the right approach as the first step.
and obviously, you're not gonna get any argument from me. I do believe that very strongly, because I've seen it succeed over and over again.
Yeah, and I've seen it fail because it wasn't done.
Absolutely,
And that's a huge
absolutely.
thing. So when you
Right.
don't have this kind of stuff,
Yeah.
these situations can come apart.
Yeah, I agree, Paul, I agree.
And there's no greater detriment to fundraising than starting somebody thinking this thing is just a fiasco.
Well,
Right.
And to make
Right.
this a success with the town, we have to show them that we can do discrete portions of this. It's not 1.4,
Right,
3 million
right,
dollars
that's-
that we need today. We
Yeah,
need
yeah.
this much to get to this point, and then we need this much to get to the next point.
Yeah.
And we get to those points, we might be able to keep things stable for
Yeah.
a while, and then raise more money to do
Right.
the rest.
It's a sound approach. You actually get a better product after that. You honestly do.
Well, you get
When you're-
buy-in.
You get a lot of buy-in, and sometimes you will make a different decision because of it. I have seen, you know, I mean, this is my approach. May not be perfect, you know, it's not. I mean, there are other ways to do this. But I have seen, like, I just think the thoughtfulness that goes into phasing a project typically has a very positive outcome in the end. You do find ways to save money. You do find ways to approach the project in a way that's going to be beneficial for the town. You know, I don't know everything about Bowdoinham. You do. You know, there's no way I can answer every
every
question.
very heavily either in the stuff that you really can't do anything about right now. So you
Yeah.
get to concentrate on what you're
Mhm.
able to do, you prioritize and phase it. You got something to aim at that's very specific,
Yeah,
with a purpose in mind, and it's easy to move forward. Because otherwise, you know, as this committee has found over time, is the overall project can be very overwhelming.
yes, it is.
So,
Yeah.
you know, we need to layer this thing out, start with, you know, paragraph 1, page 1, chapter 1, and let's get this thing going, and
I think your first chapter is significant, because we've got to get a roof on this thing. And we can't do that without some structural work.
Yeah,
Other than that, we can hold it in stasis for as long as you need it to be.
and that's the
know?
conversation we've had in the past too, about getting this thing, the initial parts of this done. Once they're done, if it takes 15 years to complete the rest, it's irrelevant, the building is in a
Yeah.
preservation state. We
Yeah.
stop deteriorating.
Right.
And now we can really, you know, it gives us that latitude,
Yeah.
you know, to move forward comfortably.
Yeah.
And not feel panicked that if we don't do something in the next 5 years, we're gonna be having a fire sale here and stuff.
Right.
So
right.
I'm grateful for the work that you've done.
Well, I appreciate that, and I do want to talk, I do want to get in the weeds a little bit on the insulation detail, and at least express why we chose, as we were looking at this building, I made a choice with Jessica in consultation to approach this as a preservation effort with regards to the exterior of the building. And so in the overall scope of work that we've described here, we have recommended an interior wall cavity insulation instead of an exterior envelope. And I know that this is something that's near and dear to your heart, because we talked about it like at the first meeting, how to approach this. And so my approach is based on the least invasive that I feel with regards to both the exterior envelope and the interior envelope. And I am not looking to get as tight as, you know, a SIP-covered timber frame. I believe in a insulated building. You can't just leave this alone and just keep pumping, like maybe you can put solar on, but
Roof, would you insulate, even though you're insulating the interior on the side, would you still insulate on the outside of the roof, or would you recommend just an interior insulation?
we have recommended interior insulation in the wall cavities and a layer of insulation at the tie beam level
Okay,
to insulate
so a cold roof.
cold roof.
Okay.
Yep. That is not the only way to do it, and the balance may evolve. Paul brings up a very good point of air infiltration and overall barrier. Having an exterior insulation is a very good way to make the building as tight as possible from all different kinds of perspectives, as far as like air infiltration, R value, pest infestation. I mean, this is not a tight building right now. We know that it isn't. They can come in anywhere. This is a wide open building right now. They can come in the bottom, they can come in the top, and you're losing tons of heat. And when you
Are you
heat
talking about mice or water?
mice, water,
Mice, water.
bats, you know, anything that owns that building more than you do right
The
now.
house that I'm in is not very tight, and I sort of like that, because then I can breathe.
There is a whole body of knowledge around that as well. And so from my perspective, my balance point is how much do I lose by integrating an insulation detail? And I felt, and so did Jess, that there was enough exterior information, windows. I mean, if you're insulating from the exterior, you're managing the window exterior detail, you're managing the modillions that go along, you're doing all. Yes, there is a ton of clapboard restoration to do on this building, but do I want to take every clapboard off? And this is a discussion that will evolve. And I know that you feel strongly about it because we've talked about it a couple times. I just wanted you to understand what my perspective was and what my balance point was, and why I recommended a less than optimal from an insulation perspective, but a good way to retain as much of the fabric as possible. So there's still a discussion about air infiltration and moisture and condensation, and all of that occurs in a micro environment here more than it does in most houses. Like the environment, the wind shear on that tower, the heat and the cold that's in that roof system far exceeds most of anything you understand in your own home. It is qualitatively different. It is exaggerated. It is extreme in both directions. So the insulation discussion is extremely important. I'm just not sure it's your first priority at the moment.
Yeah, that's what I was.
That's, yeah, and what I was
It's not
gonna say,
gonna
we've
drive
got
our decision.
quite a bit of time to really chew on what our options are for that.
Yeah.
It's not, right now, it's
And
It's
I,
great to have different options on the table for us to
Yeah.
think about and to
Yeah.
discuss, but the future of doing that is quite a ways down the road.
it's a couple
So I
years out
really don't
at
feel.
minimum, yeah.
You know, and so essentially my perspective on my approach to this is, one is to preserve the timber frame. The most desirable application is to encase it entirely
Yeah.
inside the conditioned space.
Yeah.
That none of the frame is exposed to the non-conditioned space, and by conditioned space, it's interior
Yeah,
of any other
Yeah.
thermal and
There's
moisture environment.
tons of research to that effect.
Yeah, so,
Absolutely.
you know, so what has preserved this timber frame isn't, to this date, isn't that it's a breathable building, and we could have discussed that one for years. It's that the building hasn't been heated, so the interior and exterior surfaces of most of the frame has always been very close to the same.
It's acclimated to
So it's
itself.
moved the
Yeah.
same, so it's always exposed similarly. When you start to insulate a building and do a wall infill, you wind up with the outside surface of the timber frame outside, and the inside surface of the timber frame inside. And those two environments are often thermally and hydrically different. The
Yeah.
moisture content and the temperature is different on both sides of the beam. And what really suffers is the beam moving differentially interior and exterior. And it's hard on the structure itself.
Yeah,
It's not ideal. It certainly is an option that's been done for years that way.
it has, and, you know, and with some success and sometimes disaster. That is the balance point. I come from the perspective that I'm not trying to make this as tight as a new house can be, because I don't believe that's an attainable goal, because it is an ancient timber frame. And it has breathed, it has acclimated without that transference of heat. To the degree that we have technologies that, you know, solar, our technologies are increasing exponentially with regards to retrofitting this building. We may have a breakthrough. I mean, there's a whole new factory in Belfast making wood fiber insulation. It has a tremendous, it's not the same R value as you know, oil, because that's what all of this stuff is, all the foams. But it's a huge, huge new technology. And I'm not saying we wait for, you know, the best technology. All I'm saying is the discussion needs to be more in-depth than we're gonna do tonight.
Yeah, and I think
You
we
know.
need to leave it.
And just because I think these things, if eventually you're going to insulate the outside here, would you want to have the roof insulated on the outside, or would it make no difference? Do you
I
see
would
what-
want it on the outside.
Yeah.
See, that's what I'm trying to say, is that if we do the roof, well, I suppose
It's not a
actually,
permanent roof.
it's not a permanent roof,
Right.
right?
Right.
So
You're
15
taking-
years down the line, you could
You
do
could
it.
So we have an
Right.
option, and the fact of the matter is, from a preservation perspective, if the only choice we had was to do the roof right away, period, and
Yeah.
whether it's a temporary fix or a permanent fix, then yes, you move to option B. Option A
Right.
has been eliminated by necessity.
Yes, right.
And we move to option B.
Yeah.
So we have several options to look at. I think we need to further the discussion in the advantages and disadvantages of each. And we need to make an informed decision, but that decision is a long way from here.
Yeah,
But we have time for the discussions
Yeah.
before that decision has to be made.
One of my problems with the outside insulation is that I will notice the 2 inches difference. I mean, the other people wouldn't. but
Yeah.
I would.
How are you gonna notice it?
I just would notice.
well, she knows
Tell me how.
she knows you did it.
Tell me
No,
how.
I would, you're adding 4 inches, you're just changing.
It does change. It- Most people would not
I
recognize
think we
it.
disagree with you on
Yeah.
that, because all of the exterior trim is repeated exactly like it sits. The
Yeah.
corner boards are moved out 3 inches, so your clapboards are 3 inches longer on one end of the building and the other, and no one in the world is gonna see that.
Yeah.
Your freeze boards, your dental molding, your cornices, Everything else is exactly the same. There is no way in the
Are you
world
gonna
you
do
could
the
walk
same
by there
thing
and
with
recognize
the,
it.
with the, are you gonna do the same insulation on the outside of the,
You have to do the entire exterior of the
because
structure.
then
Right.
that would be different if you did.
It's a major task, and here's what happens. In the real world, when someone insulates the exterior of their house, they put on a soffit that's this high, the rakes get big, it doesn't look anything like it looked before it was insulated from. That is not what would happen here. If you were insulating this building from the outside, you would utilize the same proportion. In other words, the wall would end up being taller. When you put a SIP or insulation detail here on the top like this, say you're 10 inches taller, right? The building has to extend out 6 inches for the, I'm talking SIPs at this point, which is a structural insulating panel. If you insulate this wall 6 inches and this wall 10, you have to bring that point to here in order to do the trim element. You're not taking this one to here and then adding 10 inches, because then you have this crazy soffit. So you no longer have the overhang that you have on this building, because it's created as part of the timber frame. What you end up doing is adding the overhang back onto it and doing the trim elements that you see on this building. So in proportion, to answer your aesthetic question, you can retain the proportion of the exterior of this building very well if you take into account that you have to elevate the trim elements. You know, so it can be done tastefully, it's often not. And that is extremely recognizable from the
I
outside.
guess it was when you said, oh, we could put vinyl siding on the outside temporarily.
You're gonna misquote me on it. What I said, we can put, if we need to do something like vinyl siding as a temporary repair, like
Yeah.
we're doing a temporary roof, it protects the structure until we can afford to replace it.
Well, we
Right.
already have done vinyl siding, it's on the
So
staple.
that was,
Down.
Right.
so I'm not advocating
Saying
for
that-
vinyl siding, I'm advocating for an affordable sheathing that keeps the building protected until we can get what it is we really want.
Right. And the thing is, you do have the big picture to keep in mind. What do you really want? Because it does drive those decisions. It's not, you don't have 5 years to make those decisions, because you're gonna start making, and they're gonna start compounding.
So some of the advantages of exterior insulation are you can use a lower R value and gain the same type of thermal protection because
Right.
you reduce the infiltration to almost zero.
Yeah,
You can use rock wool, which is a organic material that's completely fireproof
yeah,
and completely water permeable. So water does not stay in it, period. Where in cellulose and fiberglass both have an absorption rate that they hold bulk water, which can cause more problems if it gets wet. All right, so there's a lot of advantages and disadvantages to both of them. And
Yeah.
from Arron's perspective, which is a valid one for us to have a discussion about, is that he's gone to the next level in preservation, which has included the siding to be preserved. And I'm staying pretty much in preserving everything from the sheathing in. It's not that I don't advocate for reusing the trim around the windows and keeping all of those elements exactly the same as possible and historically correct. So we have plenty of room to discuss the pros and cons of these methods, to look at different options and to try to assess what it would cost to do different options.
right, that's the other key
And
to it.
that's discussions that we could save for another day.
Yeah.
I guess,
Yeah.
I think if we did have to go to the vinyl.
You don't have to go to vinyl, there was no requirement to go to
Okay, well,
vinyl.
Yeah.
I just think people would be turned off in terms of donating.
Well, that's
Does
fine,
anybody
but
know
there's,
there's vinyl in the steeple? The steeple is entirely.
I realize I don't like that either. And I hate what they did with the trim boards, which they didn't.
These are the balances that you're about to
But it's
engage. yeah.
it's the same discussion as putting an asphalt roof on there. It's something to get us
Yeah.
to a point where
Right.
we can afford to
Right.
do
and that's the
what
key
we
thing
wanna
to
do.
keep in mind. There's nothing permanent in what we're doing unless we go for a permanent solution. If we're going for a non-permanent solution, what we wanna do is maintain preservation.
I would be careful about talking about permanent versus non-permanent solutions as you go for $200,000 from the town. I think the verbiage that you want to talk about is that we're taking our initial necessary steps to prolong the life of this building. It is not necessary for them to understand at this point that that might be a 5-year temporary or 15-year, it doesn't matter. It is necessary. And that's where I would focus. Your next few steps are necessary steps to preserve this building. And you have a plan, for its future full preservation. This is what this document allows. This is where you need to really start focusing on your message. I'm really glad that Nicole put it on the website, but it might have been a little early. All right, you need to, you need
Not a
to,
lot of people would know it's there yet.
well, that, and so that's probably an advantage. And I just, when she said, I'm like, I was initially excited, and then I'm like, well, and it's fine, it's public I mean, it's public information.
It's their document.
It's their document.
Yeah.
And to that extent, I think that's a really good approach. But I do think that this group needs to focus their message on what they're doing first. Because, you know, and the numbers out, and she put the whole report on, so people can see the 1.4. That is scary for a lot of people, right? They need a recycling
I was
barn.
being depressed over there.
Yeah,
Figure.
yeah,
That's why it
Yeah.
took me.
I thought I had primed you enough for that.
yeah.
By the way, I ended up getting vinyl flashing to go over the aluminum flashing. I tried to clean it and it disintegrated, so.
So I just, you know, the next step is really to maybe formalize that initial phase. And we can do that with you. But I also think the next step is like, what is your message to the public? And, you know, can you start looking for some people? I think that's a good next step for you, you know?
So we're meeting we have one work group that meets every other Tuesday. And we're discussing in particular the initial approaches to
Yeah.
phase one, which is the structural stabilization of the
Yeah.
building, which includes the roof framing and the millwork.
Yeah,
I will be more than happy to start to share with you outlines of what our discussions are and where we're.
yeah,
sort of
please,
aiming
I
at,
mean,
and
just
so that
email
then-
me with
Yeah,
your
and then you can
consensus.
give some feedback if you'd like. I know you're not on retainer with us. I don't know how much to involve you from this point on.
It's really up to you. I mean, I'll tell you if we're getting up there, but I mean, there's a certain amount of support I'm gonna provide you because you've paid me to do this. I mean, I feel obligated to do that initially. When we start building specs, then I will need to charge you and we will work on an hourly basis. We do that all the time.
Okay,
And
and that
that's
would
fine.
be really good to have.
Yeah.
If you and Nicole would have that conversation.
Yeah, yeah,
That would be
Yeah.
great for us, and
Yeah.
then we'll have that as
Yeah.
part of our go-to documentation, so
Yeah.
that when we do get to the point where it's looking like we want a little more in-depth work or
Yeah.
discussion with you, that we're prepared to take care of that end of it as well.
and I'll synthesize some thoughts from tonight in an email to Nicole. And, because, I mean, obviously from a preservation perspective, I'd love to just jump in and fix all the structure and then hand it over to someone else and let them put the roof, you know, and that, you know, that is a goal. That may be a lofty goal, but nevertheless, I do have biases on how to approach the phase piece, but I do think what we talked about as a first step is adequate and not too redundant. And that's my goal, is to not have the redundancies that come with phase projects. Like, I mean, we sometimes use the term mobilization. When you start a job, you mobilize on that job. You bring all your equipment, you get your crew ready, and so when you come and start, you're going, you're ready. So when you phase something, there is a mobilization and a demobilization, and that is a cost. But if that's how you can do the project, you just want to limit that number of mobilizations. You know, at some point you fundraise until you get there, right? But that's not going to be your first, and you don't have enough information, you don't have enough community support to do anything except stabilize and not stabilize, begin the repair process. Okay, it does come down to that language. And so think about that language as you move forward with the town, because you're going to end up presenting to them, right? You're going to go ask them for money at some point. So think about that. And I'm more than happy to talk with any, you know, I'm more than happy to meet again. It's not a problem.
Well, good.
So I appreciate your
My
time.
guinea hens,
What's that?
I gotta go take care of my guinea hens.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
it's,
we're
I think
good.
it's time for us to wrap up.
Yeah, we're good.
So, Aaron, really
I'm leaving all of these hard copies with you. I find reading hard copies just easier than electronic myself.
So the hard copies Nicole wanted to keep for the downstairs.
Leave one at the pub, you know.
Yeah, so we want to
Those are the hard
Yeah,
copies.
the ones that are bound are gonna stay in the office, so we
Yeah.
have those here for her, and the
Yeah.
other ones are for us, we can do what we need to with
Yeah.
them. So, thank you so much for coming.
You bet. It's a pleasure to work with you.